Today we're going to take a look at a new experiment in science where scientists have created matter from light. And this is a very important thing that has occurred because, as always, I always want to update you guys and show you when modern science is getting closer and closer to what we have been saying. And of course, what we have been saying for years and years and years is that this is a reality of living light. And if you're new to Hyperianism, maybe you haven't heard that before because we talk a lot about reality being mental, reality being mind. But today we're going to talk a little bit about how mind and light are actually the same thing. That this is a reality of mind, this is a reality of living light. And because this is a reality of mind, a reality of living light, this means that we can produce all of the universe, all of the material world from light. And in the Breit-Wheeler process, it's known that you can, by colliding photons, produce an electron-positron pair. And this is also known as pair production and annihilation. We're going to be talking about that. And again, new evidence in science that is confirming the Breit-Wheeler process and the implications this has on Hyperianism and how we view reality and why scientism needs this drastic update to realize that light is fundamental, not matter. Light absolutely breaks the materialist paradigm. This is not a reality of matter at all. This is a reality of light, a reality of mind, whereby we can produce matter from light. And again, we're going to be taking a look at this experiment, which shows that scientists can create matter from light. All right, so what I'm going to do is just give you a little bit of an understanding of how Hyperianism views light and mind. Then we're going to take a look at this new experiment done that gives evidence towards the creation of matter from light, and we'll be doing a little bit of a back and forth here. So basically, this is how Hyperianism understands light. So if you are new to Hyperianism, we say that this is not a material world. This is a world of mind. And we know this via logic and reason. We know that this is a rational reality, and we know that this is a mental reality. Philosophically, this is known as mathematical idealism. It is idealist in that it's a mental reality, and it is mathematical in that mathematics is the way that mind is expressed or defined. So, for example, reality is nothing but sinusoidal waveforms, sine and cosine waves, as defined by the source formula, which is Euler's formula, which is essentially a formula that shows the generation of a sine and a cosine wave. So reality is nothing but a multiplicity, many iterations, infinite iterations of the source formula, which means that all reality is nothing but interacting waveforms, sines and cosines. These sines and cosines are unextended. These sines and cosines as a whole result to zero, which is why they are able to exist, because their existence is contained within their essence. They must exist by definition since they are mathematically equivalent to zero, and zero's existence is compulsory. So, reality is a reality of mind, as defined by sinusoidal waveforms. Now, these sinusoidal waveforms in Hyperianism is also how we define light. So it's important to understand, when coming to Hyperianism, light, mind, frequency, sinusoids, mathematics, these are all different words for the same things. Though mathematics can describe both matter and mind, depending on how it's used. But in general, light, energy, frequency, sinusoids, mind, thoughts, these are all different words for the same thing. Why? Well, because they all share the same definitions. Frequency is nothing but thought. It is defined mathematically. Mind is a thing that is ultimately unextended. It doesn't have any height, length, width, or depth. And light is that which is maximally time dilated and maximally length contracted, and it is massless. It doesn't have any mass. It is maximally length contracted and maximally time dilated. In other words, it doesn't experience space or time. It is outside the paradigm of space and time. It is outside of the realm of space and time because its spatial properties have been reduced to zero and its temporal properties have the same thing has happened with its temporal properties. So light, mind, frequency, all this shares the same properties. So in that, the reason why we're talking about this today is because in Hyperianism, we say that this is a reality of mind. And so that matter is ultimately a kind of illusion, and that matter cannot exist independently of mind. Matter is a product of mind, and since mind is equivalent to light, this means that matter is a product of light. So if you want to know a little bit about what this means, I mean, think about when you go to sleep and dream. When you go to sleep and dream, your dream world is dependent upon your mind for existence. Mind creates the material world of your dream world. So, same thing in this reality, except it's a collective phenomenon. The monadic collective, the collection of all of us together, through our wave interactions, create this material world. And since mind is light, that is equivalent to saying that light generates the material world. Light generates matter. Now, how does this how is this done? How is this possible? This is done through Fourier mathematics. Fourier mathematics describes the process of being able to transform frequency information into space and or time information. So we have frequency information that can be transformed into space-time information. And so when you have the idea of mind and matter, a long-time problem, this is known as the mind-body problem or Cartesian dualism, has been, well, if mind and matter are different, how do they interact with one another? If they, if one is unextended and one is extended, if they share very different properties, how can they possibly interact? And this has been a problem for philosophy for a long time. And the answer is they do so mathematically via a Fourier transform. So if mind is frequency and matter is space-time functions, mathematically you can transform frequency functions into space-time functions and vice versa via forward and inverse Fourier transforms, also known as analysis and synthesis equations. You can synthesize frequencies into space-time functions or then break down space-time functions into their constituent frequencies. And so this is how one easily solves the mind-body problem, where you can do so via Fourier mathematics. Because yes, mind and matter share different properties in a certain sense, but they have the commonality in that they're both mathematical. So since they're both mathematical, they're not truly different substances. They are the same substance, just expressed in different ways. You have a mathematical sinusoid. It's mathematical. You can express this via frequency, or you can express this via space-time. So the realm of mind is the realm of frequency. And the realm of frequency only depends on frequency. It's not dependent on space or time. It's not a function of space and time, would be more apt to say. So the realm of frequency is the realm of mind, which is also the realm of pure light. It's a function of frequency, not a function of space or time. However, you can take frequency functions and transform them into space-time functions, which are then dependent upon, which are then functions of space and or time. More, to be more precise, it would be space-time. So what we're going to look at today is a scientific evidence that has recently arisen where scientists have shown and given evidence for what's known as the Breit-Wheeler process, which means that matter can be created from light. And of course, what does this have to do with Hyperianism? Well, it has to do with Hyperianism because in Hyperianism we say that light generates matter. And this is very damning to the scientific paradigm. I mean, not explicitly, but if you rationally understand what light is, it's very damning because science cannot explain what light is. Light falls outside of the materialist paradigm. Now, that's not to say science can't model light. It can create equations that apply to light. It can, create a map of light, but it cannot ontologically explain what light truly is, because light falls outside of the material paradigm. Light is not material. It is not a material particle. Light is massless, it's maximally length contracted, maximally time dilated, and it is outside the paradigm of materialism. Not only that, but materialist science, cannot define matter for that matter. It has no, universal definition of matter. It cannot define what matter actually is. So, materialist science is a failure. Even within its own paradigm, it has collapsed internally because it claims that reality is material, yet cannot define what matter actually is. And furthermore, light falls outside the paradigm of matter. And in addition to that, materialists cannot explain the existence of the laws of physics. What is a law of physics? Is it made out of something material? Of course not. Obviously, it's not. A physical law is not, made out of matter. So what is a physical law if it's not material? Well, if it's not material, it falls outside of the the materialist paradigm. So anyway, there are many, many reasons. That's not really the point of this video, but there's many reasons why materialism is a failed paradigm. The idea that reality is matter and that's it, which is the common stance of, most of those who subscribe to scientism today, scientific materialism and empiricism. That is the belief that reality is material. But it's a completely faulty paradigm that completely and totally runs into paradigm-destroying problems all the time. And it's going to be looked in the future as a completely laughable and ridiculous concept. Just like flat earth theory is looked at and laughed at. You know how flat earthers constantly refuse to look at evidence that overturns their idea of what reality is and what the earth is? They constantly refuse to look at it, and they twist all the data to make it try and seem like the earth is flat. Same thing with materialism. Materialism has absolutely been refuted, but materialists continue to close their eyes to the data that shows that materialism has been refuted, and the rational proofs that materialism has been refuted, and constantly are twisting things to try and fit their paradigm when it clearly doesn't. Again, very, very, very similar to flat earth, syndrome. So anyway, with regard to today's idea, let's take a look at scientific evidence that shows that light can be created from, or that matter can be created from light. Again, this is not because I give weight to any kind of claim made by materialist science, but because I like to show you guys when even materialist science is starting to get closer and closer to what we discuss. So here we have scientists generate matter directly from light. Collisions of light produce matter and antimatter from pure energy. This study demonstrates a long predicted process for generating matter directly from light, plus evidence that magnetism can bend polarized photons along different paths in a vacuum. Scientists study particle collisions at the Relativistic Heavy Ion Collider, a U.S. Department of Energy Office of Science user facility for nuclear physics research, have produced definitive evidence for two physics phenomena predicted more than 80 years ago. The results were derived from a detailed analysis of more than 6,000 pairs of electrons and positrons produced in glancing particle collisions at the RHIC and are published in Physical Review Letters. The primary finding is that pairs of electrons and positrons, which are particles of matter and antimatter, can be created directly by colliding very energetic photons, which are quantum packets of light. This conversion of energetic light into matter is a direct consequence of Einstein's famous E=mc² equation, which states that energy and matter, or mass, are interchangeable. Nuclear reactions in the sun and at nuclear power plants regularly convert matter into energy. Now, scientists have converted light energy directly into matter in a single step. Making matter from light, two gold ions move in opposite directions at 99.995% of speed of light. As the ions pass one another without colliding, two photons from the electromagnetic cloud surrounding the ions can interact with each other to create a matter-antimatter pair, an electron and positron. So here you are having scientific evidence that light can produce matter, and specifically matter and antimatter, an electron and positron pair. And here's a quote from one of the scientists that worked on this. It says, "The idea that you can create matter from light smashing together is an interesting concept. It's a striking demonstration of the physics immortalized in Einstein's equation E=mc², which revealed that energy and mass are two sides of the same coin." So what you're viewing right now, this light being converted into matter, is the demonstration of the ontological mathematic Fourier process of transforming frequency into space-time. Frequency functions into space-time. Or in other words, mind into matter. In Hyperianism, light and mind and frequency are all the same, and light, mind, and frequency can be converted into matter. So this is really a demonstration of the Breit-Wheeler process. So the Breit-Wheeler process is a physical process in which a positron-electron pair is created from the collision of two photons. Now, this is also an idea relating to what's known as pair production and annihilation. And so pair production, it just often refers, I'm reading here from a definition, pair production often refers specifically to a photon creating an electron-positron pair near a nucleus. And then annihilation is when an electron and a positron collide, they annihilate and disappear, giving off two gamma rays or photons in the process. The particles appear to have vanished and all energy is transferred to the gamma rays. So basically what this is saying is that you can take light, and by having the light interact with one another, light will produce an electron and positron pair. Conversely, in annihilation, when an electron and positron pair come together, they annihilate one another and transform into light. What this is ontologically is matter being transformed into mind and mind being transformed into matter. And this is what we have been saying in Hyperianism and ontological mathematics, that light can be converted into matter, aka mind, aka frequency, can be converted into matter via a ontological Fourier transform. So to be able to understand what this truly means is that light is fundamental to reality, because mind is fundamental to reality. And again, this isn't any kind of new agey or woo-woo concept. In Hyperianism and ontological mathematics, we define light through the source formula, which is Euler's formula. It is a very specific formula, and this formula, via iterations, allows us to transform it into a space-time representation via Fourier mathematics. So light also has very, very important properties. Light is maximally time dilated, maximally length contracted, and speaking of this, I want to share with you a quote by physicist John Gibbons, who said, speaking about the time dilation and length contraction of the photon, "This is an enormously important idea, which I have never seen given due attention. From the point of view of a photon, it takes no time at all to cross the 150 million kilometers from the sun to the Earth, or the entire universe, for the simple reason that this space interval does not exist for the photon. So for a photon, the interval of space does not exist, because ultimately light is a function of frequency, not a function of space or time. Physicists seem to ignore this remarkable state of affairs." I'm reading the quote again. "Perhaps they are simply so stunned by what the equations say that they have not fully thought out the implications. As I hope to persuade you, though, this behavior of space and time from the point of view of photons may help to resolve all the outstanding mysteries of quantum physics." And this is true. The whole reason that science is unable to explain quantum mechanics and all the mysteries of the universe is because they're operating under a failed paradigm which takes matter to be fundamental. This is not true. Light or mind or frequency is fundamental. And once you admit that light, mind, and frequency is fundamental, you can resolve all the problems in quantum mechanics and physics and, all this crazy ideas about probability functions and reality being indeterminate, and every issue that you encounter can be easily resolved by understanding that reality is not material. So, another thing to understand here is that, so in Hyperianism, light is mind and frequency. So light actually does not exist within space-time. Light exists outside of space-time, but space-time depends on light or frequency for its existence. Matter depends on mind. So the way to understand this is that light is a function of frequency. Light is not a function of space or time. Space and time is a function of space and time, but it depends on frequency for its existence. The only thing that exists is frequency. And how do you get these space-time functions? Okay, so if you're not familiar with Fourier mathematics in a nutshell essentially works like this. You have a set of Fourier basis waves, which are a set of frequencies. By adding these frequencies together, you can create space-time functions that are related to space and time, functions that are then functions of space and time. So you have these space-time functions that are the result of frequencies. In other words, when you add frequencies together, you get matter. And what are we seeing in this Breit-Wheeler process? When you collide photons, you get matter. But here's the same thing's going on here. And the annihilation is just the decomposition of matter into its frequency patterns. But here's the important thing to remember, that frequency is not a function of space or time. So light itself does not actually exist within space and time. And you might be thinking, but well, what do you mean? I can turn on a light switch and I see light all the time. Well, the important thing to understand is that in ontological mathematics and Hyperianism, what you are actually observing is light's interaction with space and time. So when you flip on a switch and you see things light up when there's an interaction there, what you are actually seeing in terms of ontological mathematics is the interaction of light with space-time. So it's an important thing to understand that in ontological mathematics, light doesn't exist inside of space-time. However, light interacts with space-time. You can have an interaction while not existing within it. So everything in reality is mind, is light, and matter is just a transformation of light. It was David Bohm, the physicist David Bohm, who said, talking about the energy of existence, this ocean of energy could be thought of as an ocean of light. He also said the universe is frozen light. And that's exactly what it is. It's that light has been transformed into matter. Matter is simply a representation of transformed light. It's a representation of frequency functions. Again, this isn't any kind of new age woo or mysticism. This is just an ontological interpretation of Fourier mathematics founded on logic and reason. It's a precise analysis. And so another way to try and intuitively grasp this idea, and I've given this before, if you think of all reality as being mind, and if you metaphorically think of that as sort of a pool of water, if you think of the pool of water as being mind, and then you view ice forming within that pool of water, that's a bit like light or mind becoming matter. You have this pool of water, which we'll metaphorically say is mind, forming ice, which is matter in our metaphor. So you have this pool of water forming ice. Now the pool doesn't exist within the ice. The pool rather exists outside of the ice, but the ice exists within the pool. And the pool can interact with the ice. So same thing in our analogy here. You have a reality which is pure mind or pure light. Space-time exists within the realm of pure mind or pure light or pure frequency, and pure frequency can interact with it. So you have everything that is light, and matter is just a transformation of light via Fourier mathematics, which shows that you can transform frequency functions into space-time functions. So the idea here too, we can take this all the way back to the Big Bang. Well, what came before the Big Bang? Well, before the generation of matter, it was a domain of pure mind and pure light. The Big Bang was when orthogonal phase relations entered the picture with regard to this singularity. So basically, in the beginning, you have just before the Big Bang, at the beginning of this universal cycle, you have a pure singularity of pure mind, of pure light. That's it, just pure mind, pure light. And in this singularity, all that exists are Fourier basis waves, frequency functions. That's it. And they are all in phase. They don't exhibit any sort of non-orthogonal phase relations. When you then introduce orthogonality into the picture, you create a breaking of symmetry, and this is what allows the generation of space, time, and matter. And we can see this in Fourier mathematics. In Fourier mathematics, when you start introducing non-orthogonal phase relations, you start to get extension in the space-time domain. So the introduction of phase relations into the source singularity is what began the process of the generation of matter, which was the Big Bang, which was the introduction of phase relations to then generate space-time functions that had extension. And if all of that sounds really complicated, I mean, in a certain sense it is. But in an intuitive sense, you can just understand this as it was a realm of pure thought, whereby thoughts were in complete harmony with one another, perfect symmetry. But when these thoughts were formed together in a certain way that were not as harmonious, it generated matter. And again, if it's hard to imagine what I'm sort of talking about, you can think about this in terms of going to sleep and having a dream. When you go to sleep and have a dream, there are two ways that you can sort of think about things. You can just have pure analytic thought, and if you're just having pure analytic thought, there's no extension to it, right? It's just pure thought. Or you can have a more imaginative experience where you enter into a dream world. So having pure analytic thought is a lot different than, say, stepping into a dream world. But your dream world is still dependent upon your thoughts. It's a physical representation of your thoughts. Anyone who has studied Jungian psychology knows that your dream world is a manifestation of your unconscious. Everything that you encounter are representations of things going on in your mind. And this also fits extremely well with Hegel's idea of the logic and nature. So Hegel's conception of reality being a pure, rational, conceptual structure that then the physical world is then a physical representation or manifestation of that physical, of that mental structure. And I mean, there's just so much that I could even talk about here, even relating to the fact that the photons generate a positron and a electron, matter and antimatter. This further shows the symmetry required in the universe, because again, in Hyperianism, not only do we say that reality is mental, reality is frequency, reality is light, but we also show that it's mathematically equivalent to zero, meaning you have to have all mathematical values perfectly balanced with each other, meaning for every positive value, you must have a negative value as well. And this is even further reinforced in these experiments by showing that light produces these opposite particles, a positron and an electron, matter and antimatter. And further, we can understand this by knowing that basically the difference between matter and antimatter is 180 degrees phase relations. In a certain sense, antimatter is 180 degrees out of phase. And we can understand this by just simply looking at the source formula. The source formula is Euler's formula, which is e to the ix equals cosine x plus I sine x in its simplified version, not its generalized version, but in its simplified version. And this shows a sine and a cosine wave. And we can manipulate its phase relations. And by manipulating its phase relations, we can produce matter or we can produce antimatter simply by having iterations of Euler's formula interact with each other via different phase relations. So every iteration of Euler's formula contains the potential for creating every single particle in existence, be it matter or antimatter, via the interactions of these sinusoids and varying their phase relations, their amplitudes, and their frequencies. So by the addition and interaction of these formulas, which are sines and cosines, varying their amplitudes, varying their frequencies, varying their phase relations, their phase, we can produce all these different space-time functions. And ultimately, that's all particles are space-time functions, space-time representations of frequency functions. And again, if we're wondering, well, how can these things even exist at all? It's because ultimately in Hyperianism, everything resolves to zero. Everything must resolve to zero because we have to answer the question of how can these things possibly exist? Well, rationally, we know that if something contains the reason for its own existence within itself, then it must exist. I mean, the philosopher Spinoza knew this and wrote about this extensively. A substance must contain its existence within its essence. It must exist by its own definition or by its own cause. It cannot have its cause outside of itself, or else you're going to have turtles all the way down. You'll run into infinite regress. Something that exists, that is the foundational element or the ground of existence, must contain its existence within itself. If it doesn't, then it must contain the reason for its existence within something else. But if it's within something else, then it's not the actual ground of existence. And then that would contain within something else, and that would contain it within something else, and you get never-ending infinite regress. So what is it that contains the reason for its existence within itself? It's the concept of zero, because the concept of zero is mathematically equivalent to the concept of nothingness. And nothingness requires nothing outside of itself for its own existence. You can't stop nothingness from existence because nothing needs anything outside of itself to exist. You go, well, what do you need to create nothing? You don't need anything to create nothing. Nothingness contains within it its own self-definition for its own existence. And so mathematically speaking, we know that this is equivalent to 0, and 0 can contain all mathematical values within itself. So, furthermore, every single sinusoid contains the perfectly balanced values within itself across one full cycle. So, man, I'm really going off here, aren't I? But let me just finish this thought real quick, because I just realized, wow, we're really getting off topic. But anyway, every single monadic mind in existence is equivalent to 0. You as an eternal mind are equivalent to 0 because you are a full container. You are a complete and consistent set of mathematics that contains every single value. Because you contain every single value, you contain, your net result is 0. Therefore, you contain the reason for your own existence within yourself. You didn't need a creator God to create you. You didn't need a big bang to generate you. No, you are eternal and create and have always existed because you contain. Existence is your essence. This is aseity. This is known as aseity, where you must exist by definition because you are mathematically equivalent to 0. You are eternal, as all of us are. And again, just by looking at these new experimental results, which shows that light can generate matter, and not only that, but it comes in these matter and antimatter pairs, just further goes to show how science is ever so slowly getting closer and closer to the stance of Hyperianism, where reality is mental, aka light, aka frequency, and is perfectly balanced between positive and negative, and can generate matter, aka space-time functions, through an ontological Fourier transform. And once again, it's not as though I really give any weight to these scientific experiments, because again, ultimately they are empirical, materialist experiments, and these can always be dubious in and of themselves. I mean, for example, in this experiment, they're using virtual particles. There's just a lot of things where materialist science makes a lot of fallacious. So again, it's not that I'm giving a huge amount of weight to this, but I like to show you guys when even science within its own paradigm and within its own empirical framework is getting closer and closer and closer to what we say and what we have been saying. I mean, geez, you go back to even Gnosticism, where Gnosticism says that this is a reality of mind, which they call the pleroma, which is the realm of light, the fullness, the full light. But anyway, one last point I want to make, hopefully it's the last, maybe it's the last, I'm not sure, but that is, you can also look at the idea of a hologram. If you look at the hologram, there are three main things to see in a hologram. You have the source beam, the source, right? It's a laser. Then you have the holographic plate, and then you have the hologram. So when you take the laser, you shine the laser onto the holographic plate, and then this generates the three-dimensional hologram. And this is extremely similar to how reality works, because ultimately reality is an inner hologram, which is a Fourier projection from the source singularity. This is what happens when you go to sleep and dream. When you go to sleep and dream, your dream world is an inner Fourier projection, an inner hologram. That's what it is. That's what a dream world is. It's just not an outer hologram, it's an internal hologram from the Fourier frequency projection. So you have the source beam. You can sort of look at the source beam as being the Fourier basis waves, the frequencies of mind, and then these interact and combine to form frequency functions, and then frequency functions can be converted into their space-time representations. So you have these different interactions happening. You have the ultimate source singularity of pure mind or pure light or pure frequency, and this source singularity of pure mind or pure light or pure frequency interacts with itself to form frequency functions, And then these frequency functions via a Fourier transform can be represented as space-time functions. So ultimately, you have the source singularity, which is a realm of pure thought. These thoughts interact in a certain way to form what you might call thought functions, and these thought functions can then be represented in terms of space and time. So if you kind of think of our hologram example, you have the source beam that goes through the holographic plate that forms the 3D image, which would be like the 3D world. Well, guess what? That 3D world depends on the source beam. If you turned off that laser, whoosh, it would all vanish. Same thing how this dimensional world depends on mind or light. If you got rid of light, everything would stop existing. Just like when you turned off the laser beam in a hologram, the hologram would stop existing. This is a realm of mind. This is a realm of light. And as soon as science understands this, it will be able to solve all of its internal problems that are internally generated by the faulty and fallacious premises of its own paradigm, its own failed paradigm. And this is why in Hyperianism, one of our main goals, right, we're against many different things. We're against mainstream religion, we're against the rich elite billionaire class and the capitalist system that entails, and we are against scientific materialism. Not in terms of creating useful tools in science and medicine and technology, that's great, but in terms of defining what existence is and understanding what existence truly is ontologically. So scientific materialism must be replaced with ontological mathematics. This is a revolution in mind, a revolution in thought, a revolution in science, where we are the new science, the true science, which will replace an empirical materialist paradigm with a rational idealist paradigm. Meaning we will replace a paradigm that deals with the senses and says that matter is primary with a new paradigm that deals in reason and logic and mathematics and says that mind, which is also light, is primary. And by doing that, we will be able to greatly understand the interconnectivity of all existence, and this will be extremely beneficial in elevating humanity to the next step in consciousness and ultimately absolute consciousness, because it will finally be able to understand from a mathematical and rational perspective that they are not just dead material lifeless particles that randomly decided to work together and form a body that will just decay in the earth when they die, but no, rather that they are eternal monadic beings, eternal minds, souls, beings of pure frequency, beings of pure mind, beings of pure light, on an evolutionary trajectory towards the absolute, towards becoming all-powerful, towards evolving into divinity, true apotheosis.